The very first model was to have the consumer pay for the card. Didn't fly. Then we said, well, it's a huge win for the sponsoring organizations, which were insurance companies. Why don't you guys pay a small monthly fee for each member? It covers all of our costs. Your members are going to love it. They're going to save money. Your healthcare claims are going to be dramatically reduced. But they wouldn't do it. And so again, we kept getting forced to find a new revenue model. But then what about the pharmacy? Because I thought about the pharmacy last, because we already felt like it was a challenge to get them to agree to the discounts, because they were taking a hit on their margin in the hopes of retaining customers. But finally, we got a couple of them to try it. And then that eventually became the model where the pharmacies would pay a small percentage of the total transaction to us. And we sat in the middle. And so we would collect it. And it was kind of easy for everybody to do that. And so that became the model. And then it started to scale like crazy.
Welcome to the Strategy at Scale podcast, brought to you by Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. Our mission is to cut through the sea of contradictory business advice and get to what actually works. We interview entrepreneurs and business builders who have successfully scaled companies across industries to extract proven, high-impact strategies to scale the value of whatever you are building in the world. You just heard from Charlie Horn. His journey from entrepreneur to industry disruptor is a masterclass in strategic scaling. Charlie is a serial entrepreneur and passionate advocate for fostering innovation. Best known for founding ScriptSave, he revolutionized consumer access to prescription drug savings, turning a simple idea into a billion-dollar industry. Today, through Five Lights Group, he continues to champion emerging ventures that challenge the status quo. I first met Charlie playing golf at Pebble Beach during an offsite for a company he serves on the advisory board of. Over the course of that trip, he and my wife had fascinating, wide-ranging conversations, and I quickly came to appreciate just how broad Charlie's curiosity and insights extend beyond the world of business. Beyond his entrepreneurial success, Charlie is deeply committed to shaping the next generation of innovators. In 2012, he and his family created the Horn Program in Entrepreneurship at the University of Delaware, a leading initiative dedicated to equipping students with the mindset and skills to build transformative businesses. What struck me most about this conversation was how Charlie's experience scaling ScriptSave highlights a puzzle that so many companies struggle with: monetization. You may have identified a great customer and designed the perfect product for them, but the real question is, who pays, when do they pay, and on what basis do they pay? These three decisions define whether you actually make money from your innovation. And while every industry has its conventional answer to this question, there is rarely just one path forward. The combination of these three variables create a plethora of possibilities, and the answers you choose determine whether your business is viable, whether it is profitable, and in many ways, what business you are actually in. Charlie's story isn't just about building businesses. It's about creating self-perpetuating business models that scale efficiently. He understands that true scale isn't just about growth, it's about increasing profitability with each new transaction. In this episode, Charlie shares his insights on the economic principles behind scaling businesses, why large markets and high-margin models are crucial, his evolution of his revenue model at ScriptSave from early struggles to a breakthrough monetization strategy, how to build a company culture that prioritizes efficiency and innovation, why companies like Amazon, Google, and NVIDIA scaled successfully, and what lessons smaller businesses can learn from them. Charlie's journey highlights the importance of iterating on revenue models, leveraging distribution channels, and creating a business that grows under its own weight. His insights will challenge the way you think about scaling your business. Let's dive in with Charlie Horn. Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. I've been dying to have you on this podcast. It is great just to get to talk to you again. You've had like such an extraordinary journey. I know that you're a humble guy and you kind of don't wear it on your sleeve. You the Horn Center for Entrepreneurship, University of Delaware, is named after you. You support entrepreneurship, and you have had some really exciting successes. So we're going to go into one of those in particular in a moment, kind of take you along the journey. But maybe if you don't mind, and the audience already heard your background, if you don't mind just sort of saying, like, after all this journey, like, what would you say are the few key success factors for scaling a business?
Well, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on. I have the highest respect for you and everything that you've done in terms of driving entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. It's as you said, it's a passion of mine. I've had several companies, and they didn't all scale. I'm working on a company right now that we've had for a few years that's ideally positioned to scale, and we'll talk about some of those principles. So just thinking about the principles, one of course is, you can't scale unless you're in a really large market. There has to be a large capacity in the marketplace. If you're setting up a corner grocery store, what's your audience there? How many customers could you even realistically expect? It could be a great business, but if it's not repeatable and expandable, it won't scale. And maybe what I should start with, Kaihan, is to me, scaling means increasing and expanding profit margins. It's not just building size. Like, we could take that grocery or that corner market and replicate it, 100 times, 1,000 times, but it might not grow margins just because you're bigger. You actually might even have diminishing returns. So it's the model, right? The math, we'll call it, the economics of the business has to work out, where your cost of customer acquisition gets lower and lower over time, and your margin, your gross revenues might be the same on repeat transactions, but the cost is going down and down and down with every transaction. And so that, to me, is my definition of scale. So as you get bigger, each new transaction is more and more profitable, right? And so, but and I'll kind of bounce around here, I think. But I'm going to talk about company culture, which I think is super important, no matter what kind of business you have, of course. And but the culture around a highly scalable business has to be a culture of efficiency, and we're not just hiring people, left and right every time, we expand, right? It's how do you build the model so that that's not necessary, and does the team have that mentality, like it's going to grow? And I always found one interesting way to measure that. I love to measure things, but one of the interesting ways to measure that is what are your revenues per employee? And then what are your profit margins per employee? When you look at some of the greatest companies on the planet, that have scaled to be gigantic, and you can look it up. I don't have any of it memorized, but they're, the Googles and Facebooks of the world, NVIDIA, they scale like crazy because their cost to produce new customers is so low, and their margins continue to grow as they get bigger. And it becomes, one of my other elements is that it kind of becomes self-perpetuating, that with each additional customer, that just strengthens the model.
Love it. Yeah. What is, yeah, that's interesting. I think there's got to be like an organic metaphor there, but like as systems get bigger, they get stronger.
Right.
As opposed to, you build larger and larger machines, there's more that can go wrong with them. They tend to get more fragile. But we're talking about kind of.
Right. It's like the Amazon model, right? It's a classic flywheel. With each additional customer, they had more buying power. Customers, as long as they're executing well, want to buy more. But that initial cost of customer acquisition was essentially a one-time cost. Then as long as that customer likes you, they're going to keep coming back, or they're going to tell their friends. As the business gets bigger, now you can add more products on your platform. You can negotiate better prices. You make your platform more efficient, and it grows. That's the self-perpetuating part. It just grows under its own weight. It just goes.
Yeah, it grows under its own weight. That's a great line. Grows under its own weight.
Yeah. And trust me, by no means does this mean that it's easy by any stretch. But if you want a big business, you've got to find ways, to create those efficiencies and to create that scale. That
great,
right?
Yes. So let's dig into like one of the stories, and because you said it's not easy by any level of imagination, but at the end, it seems like it was all planned and it was obvious, and you picked the plan, you executed it.
Right.
And, we were talking in preparation for this call about your story with ScriptSave. And so I wonder if you just start the story with the end. Forget all the messiness going up to that, but like, how did that story end for you?
Okay. Well, that story ended, for me personally, it ended in an exit. We sold the company. At the time we sold the business, we were processing over $3 billion in drug expenditures every year through consumers. And these are consumers that were paying out of pocket for their prescriptions, as opposed to being covered by a benefit plan or through an employer. And so what we had done was we replicated the employer model and just substituted the consumer, or in the eyes in the medical profession, and even in pharmacies, they would often refer to that consumer as a patient, right? And so you have patients, prescribers, pharmacies, and pharmaceutical manufacturers. So there's like 4 Ps there, which is just kind of a cute little alliteration. But yeah, and so the model had to be built so that there was wins for all the parties. So they all wanted to perpetuate the model. They wanted to keep it going. They didn't fight against it. They didn't have an incentive to find a different way or a better way. And so part of what we did at the end, to follow your thread, is we were also, and this was never contemplated in the beginning, but at the end, we were also building and creating the in-store loyalty programs for major pharmacies. So instead of walking in like today, it's GoodRx, and we were the predecessor to that called ScriptSave, people would have a card. It'd be an ID card. It would look like insurance, but it was really just a preferred pricing program. So if you were a holder of that card, you would get a significant discount from the retail price. But then eventually, again, sticking with go to the end, the pharmacies wanted to have their own card programs, private labeled. So it'd be CVS rewards, Rite Aid rewards, things like that were really important to the store to build in-store customer loyalty. Our original model, and it's the model today, again, of the GoodRxs and single cares that are out there doing it today. It's the consumer forward. Hey, I'm going to put my prescription in, and you guys tell me, when I say put it into an app, right? Fill out, here's my prescription, and tell me which store to go to get the best price, right? Is it Walmart, Costco, Walgreens, or Costco, CVS? And so the stores don't like that. They don't like you shopping right on an app. It's like all the shopping apps, right? It's like,
you want switching costs,
right?
They want switching costs to increase their value.
Yeah. So the retailers want to know, how do we retain, those customers and build. So we were building loyalty programs with points and incentives to go to the front of the store to buy other products, typically health and wellness products.
So let's talk about how you got there, because, in hindsight, you could say, oh, well, we knew that the loyalty card opportunity was going to be there. We knew that how we were going to bring these 4 players to bear, who was going to pay and when they were going to pay. And so we executed that. That's kind of the story at the end. I guess that would be like, what they bought was that. But what was your first hypothesis of what the business model would be, how you'd make money?
Yeah, well, I was, when I started that business, and I'll throw this in, I was 42 years old, and studies show, this better than I do, and you might even have a better information, but studies I've read show that the most successful businesses are started by people in their early 40s. It's, I think, the myth is it's the 22-year-olds with these fresh ideas that nobody ever thought of, that are, and there are, right? Like the Mark Zuckerbergs and, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, right? Those were the college kids that, just killed it, right?
But, those are the stories we tell.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I had taken, 20 years or so of my adult business experience. And so I came into it, I knew a lot, and I knew enough to know what I didn't know, which I thought was super important, and where my gaps were going to be.
What were you doing before that?
I was in the insurance business, in the benefits business, and I had built various products and done a lot of marketing and distribution. So I understood insurance companies, I understood products, I understood distribution. I had built other discount programs, like in terms of optical was probably my biggest initiative. Had built a company that negotiated discounts with optical retailers, and we distributed that card to people through insurance companies. And it was a value-added benefit for a customer of an insurance company. So it was like a thank you. Hey, thanks for being a customer, Mrs. Smith. Here's a card that'll give you savings on your eye exams and your eyewear. And, it was very successful. One of the challenges with that, we go back to a scaling concept, is when people buy eyewear, they get an exam maybe once a year. It's on, if they're really staying on track, it's usually less, right? And then they don't purchase a pair of glasses every 3 or 4 or 5 years. And today I think there's more purchasing activity than there used to be back then. You'll have your spare pair, and so forth. But compared to the pharmacy transactions, and we started focusing on the senior market. So you have people over age 65, right, that are filling 2, 3, 4, or 5 prescriptions a month. So not one transaction in 3 years, but they'd have 40 to 60 transactions in 1 year. So it's this wildly bigger market.
Wow. Right. Yeah. Right. So you're looking at market, your total addressable, not as individuals, but as prescriptions. And this is the natural, high volume part of the market.
Super high volume. They more or less, they're prescribed drugs. They have to, they feel like anyway, they have to fill them. It doesn't feel elective. It feels very mandatory. I need these to be healthy. Yet the cost of drugs were so high, the cost of drugs would always increase at a greater rate than the cost of healthcare itself. Yeah, so the cost of prescription drugs, the cost inflation would be higher than the rest of the cost of the healthcare system for many different factors. But the bottom line is that it made it very tough for the everyday person, especially seniors on fixed incomes, to afford their medications. So the consumer need and demand was off the charts. People had to choose between, making their rent payments and their expensive prescriptions, or feeding their cat and their prescriptions. They would do pill splitting. They would skip days. Their health would decline as a result of not being compliant with their prescriptions. And so, we knew about all those problems. And I also understood, the technology side, the claims processing systems. Yeah, so the electronic claims processing systems at pharmacies was becoming very, very advanced. In fact, they were more advanced than the rest of the healthcare system. So it became very easy to verify a customer's eligibility with their insurance company, easy to understand, what the benefit was. The pharmacy knew whether the drug was covered, whether or not the patient had a copay. If so, how much was the copay? I mean, the drug database, there's over 200,000 drugs. And so, it's not like they look in a little book and look up your drug. I mean, there's so many different drugs and types of dosages, and it's delivered in different forms: pills, liquids, powders, injectables, you name it. And so super, super complex transaction. In fact, it's more complex than, say, the banking ATM system. And so, and you look at that platform and say, you can have tens of millions of people in the system and 50,000 pharmacies all accessing through different pathways, essentially the same adjudication system. And so, and I knew about that, and I knew about building networks, having done it with vision and with dental. I had done a couple other networks in terms of other healthcare services. So again, I had the experience to know about consumers, about insurance companies and their benefits, what was covered, what wasn't, how all that worked. I understood how pharmacies transacted. I had done some consulting in the pharmacy industry. And I was just stunned that consumers were still paying full price for their medications. And why had no one, figured out how to negotiate discounts, with retail pharmacies? And part of the reason was when you look at that model, people couldn't figure out what the delivery model was. How do we get these programs out to people in an effective way where they will actually use them and convince the pharmacies that they were going to get, foot traffic?
Let me ask you, how did you, sorry, you said consumers are still paying full price. Why is that not to be expected? I'm kind of thinking maybe there are other, if you compare it to other industries, there are industries where people don't always pay. There's some kind of price segmentation or something like that. So how do you know?
Yeah, well, you did have some price competition, right? The Walmarts and Costco's and Kmart's and Targets, they all had pharmacies. And the reason they had pharmacies was because they wanted to offer, they didn't want them leaving their store to go get other products, right? That's how those stores became so big, right? They're big, that's why they're mass merchandisers, gigantic footprints, and they want you just live in their store and not have to go to other stores, right? And so the market at that time was that everybody, all the retailers wanted a pharmacy. So it's not just the traditional Walgreens, Rite Aid, CVS, and some of these other smaller ones. The big boxes were all in the pharmacy business. All the grocery stores have pharmacies, and then you still have the old, independent pharmacies down on, Main Street in a small town. And studies had shown that loyalty of pharmacy customers were higher. The pharmacists were the most trusted professional in a consumer's life, more trusted than their lawyers, their doctors, their plumbers. Like, always tested out in the studies, pharmacist was the highest trusted. And that was a throwback to the old days of the independent pharmacists, that would get to know you and your family, hey, how are the kids? How's your mother? And they would give you lots of advice about using your meds. Be careful with this one, do this, watch out. There could be a drug interaction, right? And so, and they knew more about that than the doctors know, because that's, it's what they do. And so I think to tie that together, so you had these big merchandisers lowering prices on prescriptions because it wasn't their main business, right?
Right. They were making their money somewhere else. That was not a necessarily loss leader, but it's
in a way, right. But not everybody was doing that. And so you had, and they all wanted to sell more in front of store. And the really interesting nuance, I think, is most of the large pharmacies, and I'm talking about the CVS's and Walgreens and Rite Aids, back in those days, the CEOs and the senior leadership of those companies were pharmacists. They weren't retailers. They weren't front of store people. The front of store people would kind of report up to the pharmacy people. Even though the pharmacy is such a small percentage of the floor space, it would typically, still true today, it would run about 50% of the overall store revenues was from that little back of the store. But that's where all the traffic. And if you ever walk through a pharmacy, we all know it's like a maze, right? That you have a mouse run through. Like, they want you to go through all these different aisles to see all the products. And then they have all the impulse purchases near the checkout counters. And so, they would fight like crazy to get the rest of your shopping cart, in that store, right? And so it became very competitive, but none of them ever really figured out how to use pharmacy, how to discount it effectively in order to attract and retain the foot traffic in their stores.
Interesting. I love that argument. I thought you were going to go with kind of market optimization, or, because you want to have price differentiation in order to get the most profit out of a market. But what you're saying is it's a tool to drive sales through the rest of the ticket, and they couldn't figure out how to leverage that tool.
That's right.
because they,
Nor did they know how much to discount. I mentioned earlier, there's so many different drugs. You've got the whole basket of the brand name drugs, all the generic drugs.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. How do you getting the percentage right, the percentage discount right? I guess that'll depend on the drug and the person, or like how.
Yeah, it was. To be honest, it was 100%, trial and error. And over time, I'll go eventually get back. We'll get to the part where how we actually got it started. But once we had a lot of momentum, and the pharmacies trusted us, and we knew we would be able to perpetuate and sustain our model. We hired a lot of data analysts, and the data analysts were able to help us, create pricing algorithms to know, it's price optimization, right? In fact, to be honest, some of the drugs weren't even discounted at all because the price was already super low. It might be a $7 generic drug. You don't need to lower it to $5. People aren't going to go across the street, to save $2. So right. So really there was two things going on with the marketing with the consumer is if they're already coming to your store, how do you keep them in the store and buy more products in your store? And the other side is how do you keep them from going across the street, if the competing pharmacy had lower prices. Patients typically didn't do that shopping on their own. It's a kind of a myth, especially with seniors, that they're great shoppers. They need tools to do the shopping, and so we provided them the tools to know, which pharmacies would give them the best price.
So we've kind of covered the rationale, why you said this is an opportunity and has value for all these different people, and all these kind of things that are messed up in the system that we could create value. And now you decide to kind of pull the trigger.
Yeah, I did. And I didn't see the market going away because it would go away if somehow magically everybody all of a sudden had full insurance coverage for their prescription drugs, right? Like let's say there was universal health care, everybody on a national health plan, everyone would have the same drug benefits. They're very super similar, but there would still be drugs that aren't covered, that wouldn't be part of the formula. But if that happened, then it probably wouldn't have been a good business model, to be honest. So, but that was my biggest fear of what if, that happened. I wasn't against that concept as a person, but that would really damage the model. So I was super confident that wasn't going to happen. It's like, all right, how are we going to figure this out? And I had talked to a lot of pharmacies. It was in my brain, like every entrepreneur, like this is going to be fantastic. I've got it all worked out in my head. But it was just me. I didn't have a team yet or anything. And so I was talking to pharmacies, and I'd been in the business. I knew how to get to the heads of the pharmacies, and I'd be talking to the business development leaders and even CEOs at some of the biggest pharmacies. And it became a chicken or the egg. I didn't realize how much I'd run into this. Is they're like, well, if we don't really care if you're only going to bring us 100 customers. Like we need hundreds of thousands, actually millions. And I'm talking big. Like I'm talking hundreds of thousands and millions of members. And so they naturally would say, well, okay, well, how many do you have now? I said, well, we don't have any yet because right? It's right. Yep. And then,
that's the chicken.
Yeah. And my go-to-market strategy was not to go directly to consumers, direct to consumer marketing, because I actually didn't have a background in that. I didn't know how to do that. And I thought it would be very expensive, to get customers one at a time. And what I was used to and what I knew was marketing through large sponsor organizations, like large associations. I had done a vision program with the American Legion. Well, they had 5.5 million members. So I had a built-in market with an endorsed product being promoted to 5.5 million members who trusted that organization they belonged to. Right. And so that was my mindset of how to go to market. Mm-hmm. And so,
through a channel, accessing one channel to extra many users,
yes.
But going directly to users, that's a whole B2C, that's a whole consumer business and mindset and skill set and things like that.
Yes.
And the customer acquisition cost might be so high that it wouldn't
right.
would be.
So dramatically lower customer acquisition, and leveraging the loyalty that organization had already built with its customers. So we weren't building loyalty. They didn't need to know us. In fact, our card program, we always private labeled it. So like Blue Cross Blue Shield in Florida, it was called the Blue Saver RX. Like they didn't know us. They didn't need to know us. To them, it was a Blue Cross program.
Gotcha. You're not building your brand with them. You're leveraging the brand that they already have loyalty to.
Exactly. And that's why when we first started, so we finally did get, in fact, it was Blue Cross and another company in Florida. And, we started with one pharmacy chain. It was called Eckerd's. It was a dominant chain in the state of Florida. So they had great geographical coverage, which you have to have. And then we quickly were able to add some of the grocery stores down there, like Winn-Dixie and Publix and some of the others. And so we had a little network of 4 or 5 different pharmacies that would accept our card, and they agreed to our pricing, which in the beginning was very rudimentary, but the savings averaged 20 to 30% below normal retail prices. And so it was compelling to seniors on a fixed income. And we started with seniors. We ended up with everybody, but and so the seniors got the card in the mail, and it said, this is not insurance, but it's a value-added benefit exclusively for members of Blue Cross Blue Shield. And and so it felt special. It felt real, which it was. And because I always said, look, we could put the exact same card in their subscription to Reader's Digest, and they wouldn't pay any attention to it.
Yeah. So let me get this straight. So I just want to think it's true, right? So this partially works because I'm a Blue Cross Blue Shield customer and I get this card and it says I get 15% off. This is great. It increases my loyalty, my love for the brand, but I'm not shopping around. I'm not like now looking at Anthem Healthcare or something and realizing, oh, they also have a card that gets 15% off. So there's no kind of price comparison.
Right.
Yeah.
Not yet. I mean, we knew that would come. If we were successful, we would get Anthem, we would get the competitors. And so, because it wasn't exclusive to the sponsor. Yeah. And so the other thing, working with health insurance companies in the beginning, they had an additional incentive because they too wanted their members to fill their prescriptions. And if they couldn't afford them, and you could say, well, why didn't they just insure them? Well, the cost of insuring seniors for prescription drugs is very, very high. The utilization is off the charts. It's, insurance is supposed to be for the unexpected and unknown losses and claims. Well, these are highly predictable. They already know it. It's, no one in the industry wanted to cover prescription drugs for their seniors. And it wasn't covered by Medicare. That didn't happen in 2005 under the Medicare Part D, which is the drug benefit. So that's when drugs started to be covered, by Medicare. And when I say drugs, I mean outpatient drugs, not the drugs,
right?
Like
not the drug in the hospital,
right? Right. So we were able finally, and it took a long time, but we were able to get, like I said, a sponsor and some pharmacies at the same time to agree to, it was a pilot. Everybody knew it was a pilot, and we started kind of small, and it worked brilliantly right out of the gate. All our processing worked well. We had the back engine apparatus working, so people actually got their discounts. The pharmacies were happy, and so we knew the model itself would work. The distribution model was working. What wasn't working was our revenue model. The revenue model that we started with was, we're going to charge somebody has to pay for it, right? We have expenses and we want to make a margin. And the first model was to have the very first model was to have the consumer pay for the card. Like, hey, you're going to save hundreds of dollars and it's only going to cost you pennies or very small dollars. Didn't fly. People wouldn't buy that. They probably didn't believe it. We were never quite sure exactly, but that didn't work. Nor, and it just created all this this friction, to get into the market. Like it was, you could announce it to 100,000 people, and if only 1,000 bought it, it was not good.
Yeah, because then you can't offer the discount because you don't have the bargaining power to. Yeah, I got you. All right, so that was the first model. Then you said, no, we'll have the pharmacies pay, and then you had the chicken and egg problem, but you were able to convince 4 pharmacies to do it.
Well, actually,
right?
Well, there was another one in the middle. There was actually 2 more. So um, the, the first one didn't take long. We realized that right away. And so then we said, well, it's a huge win for the sponsoring organizations, which were insurance companies. So let's just stick to that Blue Cross example. And so we said to Blue Cross, look, why don't you guys pay a small monthly fee for each member? It covers all of our costs. Your members are going to love it. They're going to save money. Your healthcare claims are going to be dramatically reduced. In fact, we had all the studies. There's a Center of Healthcare Economics that had done the studies that showed you'll save $4. The payor will save $4 in overall healthcare costs for every dollar spent on pharmacy. And so everybody was focused on having a good pharmacy benefit and compliance, right? And so, but it was all challenging. And again, they didn't want to cover prescriptions for seniors because they couldn't figure out the economics on that model. So I thought it would be a no-brainer. Look, we'll pay 25 cents a month for each person to have this program, and you're going to save $1 on it. But they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it because, well, and this goes like to your B2B, right? When you're doing enterprise level sales, right, you have to meet the needs of a lot of different constituents, so inside that organization. So, right. And for example, there we had to meet the needs of the marketing people, right? And the business acquisition, the business development people. How did that work with their brand and building new customers, retaining customers, which was our pitch going in. But then what about the medical director and the claims people? How are they going to look at it? How are the admin people going to look at it? What about the legal and compliance? So we ran into legal and compliance issues with an insurance company giving out another benefit that's not a part of the policy, that's not part of the coverage. It's like it's illegal
because it wasn't written in the policy when people signed up. So even though it's an additional benefit, we can't because we didn't sign that when they signed
right.
up.
It's totally it's against the rules. Right. It's against the law. It's but what it stemmed from was bad agent sales practices. Like, hey, buy this insurance and I'll get you tickets, to the Yankees game. Like, that's inducement to buy. You might be able to do it.
I see.
You might be able to do it in selling real estate or something, but you can't do that in insurance. There had been too many.
I got you. I see that.
And so the insurance departments were looking at it saying, this is, it's like if you gave somebody a calendar or a pen and pencil set, they didn't care because it was super small value. It didn't really drive the transactions, but so we had to go through this with all 50 insurance departments eventually, to convince them that our product didn't have enough value, didn't have a street value that they should be concerned about. And we won that argument like every time. I was kind of surprised, but we did. So again, back to that organization though, we had to convince, and then one of the other key parts of those organizations that we had to, convince, was finance and accounting department, right? And so the finance people, that's kind of the answer is if we had 100,000 members and we were charging, 50 cents per member per month, times 12 months, it's 600,000 a year, and the accounting department saying, whoa, wait a minute. We don't know if we're going to get 600,000 of value out of this. And we couldn't measure how much healthcare claims they would save as a direct result of this card program. We couldn't really measure how many new sales they would make in terms of new customers. We couldn't measure how many customers they retained as a result of it because there's so many different factors. We couldn't find a way to set up like
isolate.
Yeah, like an A/B test.
Isolate. Yeah.
And so we were super frustrated because we knew the value was there, right? Intuitively, everybody knew it, but couldn't prove it. And so, right. And so
you couldn't get finance and accounting.
Yeah. Finance and accounting, they'd fold their arms and say, prove it to us. And they would frustrate the heck out of the marketing people that wanted to do it. So then we said, okay. And then for a short while, we found a model where we got paid by drug manufacturers for driving market share into brand name drugs. It wasn't sustainable because that was a small percentage of drug purchasing, like 90+% of all drugs are actually generic drugs that are dispensed. It's in the brand names. I mean, that's part of their game. They always pay for market share. Happy to pay anybody that can drive market share to them, and that's legal. And we were doing that for a while, but again, we had trouble demonstrating that we actually got somebody to purchase Nexium rather than Prevacid, or Prilosec. Those three competing products. So that lasted for a while, and so again, we kept getting forced to find a new revenue model. And again, we had to keep going back to the mindset. Well, look, everybody's winning here: the patient, the pharmaceutical manufacturer, the sponsor. But then what about the pharmacy? Because I thought about the pharmacy last, because we already felt like it was a challenge to get them to agree to the discounts, because they're taking a hit on their margin in the hopes of retaining customers. But finally, we got a couple of them to try it and say, look, we're doing all this work. We're driving market share to you. We're managing the transaction. We're going to add a small transaction fee. Again, back then we were talking penny, 25 cents, 30 cents on every transaction that we would collect out of the total transaction. So,
sorry, how much was that again?
In the beginning, it might have been 30 or 40 cents. I don't really remember exactly anymore. But let's say it was a $20 drug. It was discounted to $15. We would say, well, we get 30 cents of that $15. It was a very small amount. And I mean, it was more complex than that, but that was the concept.
I just want to point something out here, and it just makes sense. It's like the idea of getting people to pay when they are getting value, their propensity to pay is higher. So if you ask me to pay a amount per member, and I don't know if I get the benefit, it seems like there's a lot of the issues. But now I'm not paying you until I'm booking a transaction. So I'm willing, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Great.
100%. Yeah, they only paid when they won, when they got a customer. And again, they knew they were getting the rest of the shopping cart. It really wasn't until the drive-thrus, came in. And this was before drive-thrus. And I had senior executives at Walgreens tell me that they rued the day that they created the drive-through pharmacies, because people weren't going in the store.
Oh, sure. They're walking out with much smaller tickets because they're
Yeah.
There's no front of the store.
So the whole industry's adapted to that, but it's not like McDonald's. You're getting the same product, right? When you do the drive-through versus walking in. Like, they don't really care if you go in. In fact, they don't want you to go in, right? It's and all that. But retailers, they want you in their store. And so that's when we started building in-store loyalty programs and discounts on other products and points and things like that, to continue to drive that loyalty, enhance the relationship with the pharmacies and which were really retailers. And so that model, it was very difficult. Again, we had to pilot it, but it did work. And then that eventually became the model where the pharmacies would pay a small percentage of the total transaction to us. And we sat in the middle, and so we would collect it, and it was kind of easy for everybody to do that. And so that became the model, and then it started to scale like crazy, because nobody had this obvious out-of-pocket expense. Like the consumer, the sponsor didn't have to. The sponsor was like, "Hey, this is free." In fact, the sponsors eventually got really smart, and they realized we were making a profit on every transaction. And they actually wanted a percentage of that too. They wanted to participate in our revenues. So we set up revenue sharing agreements with them. We were happy to do it, as long as they continue to drive the product out in the market, with their customers. And so it just grew and grew and grew. And, the scalable part of it was, once we signed on a pharmacy and set them up in our system, then it just ran automatically. And I use this analogy all the time. It's like a credit card, bank issues you a credit card, right? They have the cost to acquire you as a customer, big costs, right? All the marketing and advertising, everything, the cost of the card, the mailing, they get it to you. And once you start using that card, their costs go down to almost zero, because the transaction costs are minimal. And then you're just using that card every day, all day, hopefully, as many times, and they're making, it's 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%. They just keep making money every time you use it. And yeah, they do follow on marketing, and they want to keep you as a customer, and they, set up incentives and things. They're not completely done, right? But that's the way it worked with us in the pharmacy. Once you registered your card in the system, you actually didn't even need to remember you had the card or present the card. It was just built in. And so every time she or he went into the pharmacy, it was just automatic. They would get our preferred pricing. And so it would just run and run and run. The pharmacies loved it because they were processing, and I didn't mention this, but we had to make sure that the way they processed those transactions was exactly the same as any other customer with an insurance card.
Okay, yeah, because then that would be friction that would turn off customers.
Right. They didn't have to go to a different system or a different book or do calculate, and none of that. They're like, oh, okay, here's your out-of-pocket costs. They would just charge the patient whatever it was, whatever.
Gotcha.
And then we got better and better and better at our pricing algorithms in terms of, look, pharmacy, on these particular drugs, you don't need a 50% discount to drive share.
Yep.
To satisfy your customers, 12% might be all that's needed. And then we would incorporate manufacturer coupons. I mean, it got more complex, but it all was part of that self-perpetuation with all of these participants that were winning. There weren't any it wasn't win-lose. There weren't any losers.
Right. Win-win.
It was
win,
wins for everybody. So everybody wanted to participate and keep it going.
So you kind of take 4 different tries and then finally you're able to, through nudging and proving and adjusting who pays, when they pay, what unit they pay, those kind of 3 variables, you come up with a model. No, I think a lot of entrepreneurs, after the first try, they would say, look, they don't want to pay. We picked the wrong business. What was it? I guess my 2 questions are this, and if you answer both or either one is, I'm just trying to get in your world. Where are you? With whom are you? How often are you thinking we should pivot from here to here? Let's try this, because you're trying a lot of things. And then how do you have the resilience, or what motivated you to say, you know what? It's not that the idea is bad. It's that our monetization model isn't working the way that we thought. So let's try a different one.
Yeah, well, I ask this question of early stage venture entrepreneurs all the time. Like, what's your revenue model? I listen. I try to patiently listen to what the business model is and who the customers are, how they do it, et cetera. But it always comes down to, well, it's both, right? What's your expense model and what's your revenue model, right? But what's your revenue model? Who's going to pay for this, and how do you know they're going to pay, and who's going to continue to pay, time and time and time again? And every business, of course, is different. But I'm always looking for models that have additional revenue streams. Like, what else, besides your core service, right? It's again, easy examples of like Amazon, right? It started with books. Oh, well, if people buy books, why wouldn't they buy garden tools? Why wouldn't they buy music? Why wouldn't they buy? And so they just kept adding, right, to that monolith, new products and services that was super easy to access. And so we were doing the same thing back in that ScriptSave model, adding on other like coupons and incentives that we would get paid on to buy non-prescription items. It might be ibuprofen or Excedrin, bandages, things like that, diabetic supplies. So we would be looking for extensions on the same customer in the same stores. What other products, could we help the retailers within that environment? I'm not sure I'm answering the
Yeah,
question
no, that's
you
great.
asked.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, no, that's perfect. When people are conscious of the revenue model choices, and they've thought about who they're going to pay and who's going to pay and how we know they're going to pay and how they'll continue to pay and like what the other sources are, kind of the revenue model becomes a hypothesis. And then when you test it and it doesn't work, you say, oh, let's adjust the revenue model. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, the revenue model is just sort of given to me. And if the revenue model is not working, I don't where it comes from to say, you know what, it's still a good idea. It's just that we got the wrong revenue model, as opposed to we tried it and it didn't work. So like, I was wondering what goes on in your head that you are willing to say, look, that didn't work,
Right.
but the idea is still a good idea. It's still worth pursuing a different revenue model.
As we know, some models, maybe you can't find a different answer to it. And maybe the business just doesn't work because of that. But in our case, going back to all the participants, that were interested in the model and that they all thought they would win, right? The pharmacies, the consumers, the insurance companies, other affinity groups. We worked with a lot of associations, employer groups, worked with, who else am I forgetting? You have the prescribers. Prescribers want people to fill their prescriptions. That's
Yeah, I got you.
And so
you see people are benefiting. We're creating value. It's just haven't figured out how to monetize that value. So those are two different things. You're creating value. All right, good. And then where are you? Do you have like a rhythm? Like, are you having ad hoc meetings with your team? Who's in the team? Because I'm imagining you in a room.
Right.
Pound frustrated, whiteboard, rethinking, or are you just thinking of this while you're driving to work? Or
all the above, but but we had to think, and I didn't do it by myself. Trust me, we had really good team, kept building the team, smarter and smarter people. Pharmacists, we had the mathematicians that do all the algorithms and all of that. We had clinical people, but again, the thought process was, well, who else would be willing to pay? Who else is interested in this? Well, if the prescribers are interested, would they be willing to participate somehow? And we never solved for that one, but they were incented to help motivate their patients to use the programs because they're I'll call it altruistically, right? The doctors want their patients to take the medications they prescribed. And so we could do single product coupons with a negotiated price that we give to the prescriber, and they would say, well, I'm prescribing this new drug to you, and here's a coupon that'll give you $20 off, right? And so they actually became a distribution partner. They didn't get paid because it's illegal to pay them. Some of the doctors probably would like to get paid, but you can't pay them. And so, but the drug manufacturers are very, very willing. So we had multiple, not only distribution partners but revenue streams. But eventually, right when we got to that fourth one, I mean, that's the model that stuck. The model still exists today. It's the model that Groupon came later. They emulated that model. It's exactly what they do. They negotiate a discount with a retail provider, and they share the cost that the consumer pays to that provider. It's obviously your revenues are the lifeblood of your business, and we kind of got to the point where we're always afraid of some catastrophic, like what could make this business go away, and it's one of the things I always try to keep in mind myself. And through the work I do with entrepreneurship ecosystems, is you always have to, especially the world changes so fast, right? Like what could who could take you out of the business completely, right? Like everybody's after your customers. How are you thinking about reinventing your business? Or are you just trying to incrementally improve it all the time? Like we always had to think about what would a transformative business model look like, right? And then when the internet came and when apps came along later, right? Like app is way better than a plastic card you give somebody to stick in their wallet, right? And so the world shifted to apps. If we, there's still cards actually, right? Like credit cards and all of that, but it's both, right? Now you can use biometrics to make a transaction in the store. And so, but if you just sat back and didn't make any changes, so it's everything, right? It all ties together. What's your delivery model? What's your value proposition? How does that work? What is your revenue model? What are your revenue streams? How can you create more cost efficiencies so to continue to scale and build and grow and expand and to protect your territory?
Would your key success factors that you, after telling the story, would they change? What would you say your answer is now?
Well, these are my answers now because clearly it's all in retrospect, right? And I think back, and I'm sure I forgot half of it, but again, this is quite a while ago. But And it's the same thing we're trying to do in our current business is to the extent you can automate, make things as low touch, the human aspect, your team aspect, right, is vital, right, for any business. And but what needs to be vital about that is the strategic thinking, and the execution around making your business more efficient and effective, broadening your distribution, not manual labor, licking stamps and putting envelopes in the mail, right? It's how do you automate? So you're constantly automate every process you can. You look at like the Tesla factories, not a whole lot of people in there, right? It's very, very automated. And, their goal, of course, is to drive down their costs of manufacturing but not lower their prices, right? And so, so again, low touch, repeatable processes, very large markets, self-perpetuating and self-growing, where like we said, it grows under its own weight. These are all really hard things to do, but anything that's recurring revenues, it's like when you're selling your books, right? You sell a book one time, how do you get that customer to buy more? Are there supplements to it? Would they like an audio book? Can you leverage your podcasts? And how do you do that? Who else is interested? Who else would pay for access to those customers? Or who else is winning? Is there a distributor there that there's a revenue model with? So just keep thinking around all of the, I call them interested stakeholders, right, in your business model.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. In a way, kind of you're automating for us, your intuition, earned through mistakes and errors and relearning and lots, and for you to be able to kind of distill it for us so that we can kind of take from your shoulders, take it for, and save some of that time for the entrepreneurs out there who will make the avoidable mistakes that we've all made. Is there a go-to book or a couple books that you think that are particularly important for entrepreneurs to read?
I love a book. It's not really for entrepreneurs. It's for people that want to achieve their potential. So many of us, the analogy I use, I'll give you the name of the book in a second, but the analogy I use is the way parents often look at their children and how they look at themselves. So the analogy is, I'm 40 years old. I have a very limited, potential in my life. I can only do so much. There's all these factors fighting against me. I'm not going to be Elon Musk. Maybe that's not their goal, or I'm not going to be the president of the United States. All these things they're not going to become, right? All this negativity, that comes through the normal life experiences that we have, that we need to find ways to, fight through and say, no, I can achieve more. I can do more. Because when they look at their 5-year-old child, they see nothing but possibilities, right? It's like, well, why don't you look in the mirror and see yourself as a child? Maybe a 40-year-old child, and well, what else is possible? I don't have a college degree, so I'll never become this. Well, okay, well, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so there's this awesome book. It's called The Art of Possibility. It's written by Benjamin Zander, and the book is super easy to read. It's got numerous chapters of all of these really just, it's a different perspective, right? A different, the one I just gave, a different way to look at life and yourself and what's possible for you and what's possible for the world. And so that's my number one book. I hand it out all the time.
That's he was the conductor,
yes.
Right? And this is sort of how, yes. Beautiful. Yeah. I love that. I'm gonna reread it.
And co-written by his wife.
Right.
Wrote some. And there's some videos, but the book is just phenomenal, and it's an easy read. So that's my book.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Charlie, man, thank you so much. And I know we took up more time than we had scheduled with you, and you got other things to do, but you getting to share some of your wisdom, sharing your hard-earned lessons is so valuable to us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's an honor.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strategy at Scale. Thank you to our producer, Oscar Perez, and our teams at Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm Kaihan Krippendorf. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Strategy at Scale.